Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the Film Room Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Baress. I'm here with my co-host, Joby Fawcett. Joby, how are you?
I'm doing well, Joe. Welcome to the world of podcasting.
I know, right? I've only been a guest on our colleagues' Penn Stated podcast, Donnie Collins and Sam Freeman. I know you have as well, so it's really my only time in the podcast world, although I've been told I have a great radio voice.
Well, Joe, you certainly have one that's very deep, if that's a qualification for being a good podcaster. That I don't know yet, but we're going to soon find out. It was nice of you to convince me to come out of retirement and do something like this, considering I am way beyond the generation of podcasters. So we're going to have a little bit of fun, and I'm going to have a little bit of fun with you. You know, part of the deal here, Joe, is the only way you got me to agree to this is you're doing most of the work.
That's right. I got to do the editing. I got to do all that stuff. Well, Joby, that's a fair trade-off considering all the other stuff you do.
Yeah, well, listen, I am more than happy to help you launch this endeavor, that's for sure. And for those who don't know, Joe is a very in-depth sports guy, and he has been there with our sports department for a long time. And way before then, I covered Joe, and he was quite a physical basketball player and a record setter, if I recall correctly, from your 7th and 8th grade days, Joe. And one thing I do vividly remember, I think you and I discussed it a couple of times in the newsroom there when we had a newsroom, was you used to do the little things, the things that, win you the big games. And we had a lot of fun with that. But I think we're going to have some fun here with this too.
I totally agree. And thank you, Joby, for that intro to me. Yes,
you're an all-time leading scorer, right, Joe?
Yeah, 1,464 points, but I wasn't counting or anything.
No, never. It's amazing how quickly those numbers came to your memory.
That's right. Yep. And yeah, so I guess just to segue into that, I was a local athlete, went on to Bishop Hannon High School, which obviously merged into Holy Cross. It was my last year playing basketball. And at that time, I realized that I wasn't going to the NBA. I'm only 5'9", Joby, and it just wasn't going to work out. So
no,
I decided to go to the University of Scranton to cover journalism, in the idea of trying to get into sports journalism. I joined the Times-Tribune in 2013 as an obit clerk, but obviously always had my eye on you guys on the other side of the room, and eventually got over there 2015. Been there ever since.
Back when we used to have a lot of fun on that side of the newsroom, Joe, if you recall.
Yep, and we were all together in one room. Yeah.
And there were many of us.
Yes, true. It's true. Exactly. Things have changed a bit.
A bit. But, Joe, listen. Yeah, you went into this journalism thing and this sports journalism thing with some great ambition. And, you always impress me with your passion for the local sports scene as well. And the thing for me, that I just wanted you to touch on a little bit is because you are a much younger generation than I am, me being the archaic guy that I am. And, now that we're going into this shift, this move that we're doing here, we're at the Times-Tribune moving toward more digital content and whatnot. So it's interesting here that you now are going to kind of get us in the right frame of mind of producing this podcast every week. I think it's a great thing for you to kind of dip your toe in the water a little bit and see how this works out for you.
I totally agree. I think it's going to be a blast. I mean, I listen to podcasts all the time, and so I just think it's going to be great because you could do it at any time. Sometimes when you're working too, you could throw on a podcast. So it's going to be fun kind of moving forward into more of this era of, sports journalism. And I'm just looking forward to having some fun. So
yes. And so, Joseph, for those people who may tune in and not know who I am, I have been, and I keep referencing the fact that I'm old, I've been with the Times-Tribune for 27 plus years now. And I've actually been working in local sports coverage in the media for more than 30 years now, Joe, if you can believe that. So it's been a long time. I had that once very interesting radio show that lasted about 14 years before I had to hightail it out of there. But that being said, I enjoy local sports, and I think you are the kind of guy who can really kind of get into this and bring some energy to this podcast. And we promise you one thing. We're going to try to entertain you in a lot of different ways. We're going to get some guests in the future, I'm sure. But when we started talking about podcasting and doing these sorts of things, again, I was half joking, but half serious. You're going to have to carry the bulk of the heavy lifting here for this thing, but I couldn't be happier to help you out in any way, shape, or form to get this going. And we see where we head and see if we can get people more excited about local sports here in the area through this venue and this media rather than just the print and the online.
Yeah, and Joby's being very modest throughout this whole thing. Joby is an icon.
Well,
in the zone was the name of the show, the radio show I used to listen all the time.
No, I remember it was pretty successful for quite some time.
Absolutely. Oh, it was big. It was big.
But could you imagine if I was, well, never mind.
So yeah, no, and
onward and upward, Joe.
Exactly. And to context, I'm 34, so you've been in the business for pretty much my entire life.
Thanks a lot, Joe.
Sorry for twisting the knife there a little bit.
We're off to a good start.
We're flying. So obviously the high school sports season has already kicked off, but let's focus in on the Game Face tab, high school football tab came out on Sunday. You put a lot of effort into that. Let's just start off. It always makes me laugh because we talk at the end of the school year and you're just like, all right, I got to get started on Game Face. So why don't you tell everybody when you start preparation to put this, 32-page section together?
Okay, Joe. So for our listeners, first and foremost, you have for a long time, you and our former colleague Connor Foley have been involved really doing the nuts and bolts of the production part of it. Okay. So this year was, I want to say, if I have the number correct, and I'm pretty sure that I do. I'm not quite as good with statistics and numbers as you are, Joe, but I want to say this was my 26th high school football preseason insert for the Times-Tribune. So, and what a lot of people, one of the running jokes among the local sports community has always been, right when we get toward mid-June, a lot of the athletic directors and coaches kind of kid with me a little bit and say, oh, you finally get a break here now. The school year's over. Our last sports team has played. The Times-Tribune has held its Athlete of the Week ceremony or whatever. The last all-region team has been released. And I chuckled because, to be accurate, I began my part of the production of the Game Face. I want to say the date was June 19th or 18th or 19th, somewhere around that date is when I start actually doing the planning, the research methods I need to do to get the content put together. I start to put together some of the stuff the data that we need from the previous sports season. So now it doesn't take me the whole summer. Obviously, by union contract, I have to take a vacation like everybody else. So, but I do. And I this year, I think what you were able to see a little bit more closely is because we no longer have an office where you and I work together.
Right.
I had to correspond with you and give you access to a lot of my work. So I was doing that through email, and you would get one maybe, let's say, June 26th or June 28th. And yeah, so that's when that stuff has to start to come together. And Joe, since I've been doing this for so long, I kind of have a pretty good handle on what I have to have. I have breaking points. Okay, if I don't have this done by this date, then I'm behind. If I don't have this done by this date, then I'm behind. So there is a lot of logistics that go involved. There's a lot of budgeting. There's a lot of scheduling. There's a lot of organizing. And then the actual writing kind of comes together in its own vein there. But listen, it's what I have to do because I want to produce this every year, and I hope we continue to do so in the future. But it certainly is a labor of love, and it does give, I think, and this is my personal opinion, people could disagree with me, I think it gives you the most in-depth look at the Lackawanna Football Conference in the preseason. You're going to get a lot of different media outlets that give you bits and pieces and gives you some good information as well. I'm not going to say that, but I think this really kind of gives you enough preparation for you to be ready for kickoff come Friday.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad. I hope everyone was able to pick it up on Sunday. You're right. I thought it came out great, Joby. You know, you cover every team. I already told you this, but I used it to prepare for this podcast. So I got all my information from it. So I thought you did a great job, and I think it came together great.
Well, I think it looked pretty good, and we're ready for the season. There's no question about that, Joe. And listen, the funny thing is I was able to also juggle the other sports we have to cover in the fall. So we're all ready for the start of the fall sports season. I know golf has already started, but those players have different schedules than we do. The summer is the best part of the year for them, so they get started a little bit early. But we're really getting into it now this week as all the sports teams are getting started.
Absolutely. So let's talk about it. The season starts this weekend. So why don't you start off by just taking us through maybe just a little overview of the Lackawanna Football Conference, and then maybe we could get into the specific divisions. Obviously these teams, a few of these teams came off great seasons last year and are looking to either build or get over the top this year. So what would you say about the Lackawanna Football Conference, knowing that you did the game face and also your yearly around the camps?
Yeah, Joe. So look, one of the themes of the preseason game face edition, and it's probably something I'm going to try to carry on throughout the entire year. I have a little thing that I want to add to the coverage every week, as we are going to continue to do game face every Friday in the Times-Tribune. So make sure you pick up those copies as well. So I focused in on tradition. And so yeah, we're entering in 2024. And I think that, you're going to almost have to say it's the usual suspects. And I hate to use that phrase because while it was a great movie, it's an overused term in the sports cliche world. But yeah, I mean, we're going to have Scranton Prep was our preseason number one team at the Times-Tribune. So, I certainly expect the Cavaliers, who have a lot of starters returning, and it all starts with the quarterback, Lewis Baress. Here's the thing. A couple of things that I look at in the preseason when I try to get these teams ranked, because it's very difficult to do that because you haven't seen them yet. I kind of start off, if you have a quarterback coming back who's got more than 1 year of starting experience, or even 1 year of starting experience, you're already ahead of the game in terms of your preparation for the year, because that kid's seen a lot in his time behind center and running an offense and adjusting to defenses that he sees and the intensity and the speed of a game. So I always feel that if you have a starting quarterback with 1+ years of experience, you're starting ahead of the game. So on top of that, Scranton Prep has its starting quarterback back and 3 offensive linemen, 3 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers, and 3 secondary guys. So there's a lot of experience for Scranton Prep. So I think the Cavaliers are going to be pretty good. Interestingly enough, I think the team with the equal talent coming back, and it should be a great matchup when they play in week 1, is Valley View. So Valley View was our number 2 team, and we'll get more in depth with that division matchup later on. And then you have Lackawanna Trail, which had such a terrific run last year, won its first 13 games, and then ran into Steelton High Spire, which overwhelmed everybody in the state playoffs and winning this PIAA Class 1A championship. And along the way, Lackawanna Trail gave Steelton High Spire its closest battle. Right. And I think Lackawanna Trail has a great deal of talent coming back as well. So you're kind of looking at those 3 teams that can really make a lot of noise. And my surprise team, maybe not necessarily a surprise team to a lot of people in the area, but a team that has not won a championship in a long time, but certainly is going to be in the thick of things this year is Riverside. Good tradition at Riverside. Harry Armstrong's got a great group of guys coming back, and certainly the most high-profile player in the conference in Tavion Branch, who's got now, I believe, up to 10 NCAA Division I scholarship offers, and this is junior year, and one of those schools is Penn State that's offered him already. So it's going to be interesting, to say the least, Joe.
Yeah, without a doubt. You mentioned some great seasons that, teams had. Obviously, our number one team, Scranton Prep, they had a great run last year, beating Newman Goretti, and like you said, they're loaded. Obviously, they lost, I believe, Quentin Palermo and Liam Barrett, just to name a couple. But like you said, they've got a quarterback in Louis Paris who's experienced. He could do it all. He's elusive. And also, I'm the wrestling beat writer, so I'm going to just throw in quickly that he's a hell of a wrestler, too. He had a great run to the state tournament last season, and I'm excited to see what he does in football and in wrestling, but it is fall sports, so I'll keep it there.
So that's okay. He's also a track guy. I was going to throw that in there too.
There you go. Exactly. Yeah.
Multi-sport athletes are good to promote in Northeast Pennsylvania, Joe.
Without a doubt. And like you said, I'd be interested to see Tavion Branch. I mean, just looking at the photos, he's just massive. He's just a massive.
Joe, he is a physical specimen. He is impressive to watch. In person, if you get a chance, and I know you will get a chance to see them at some point during the course of this fall season, oftentimes when you hear about some of these college kids or kids who have the potential to play NCAA Division I football, a lot of times when I'm at the gym working out, guys are always asking me, can he really play there? Yeah, he's got the ability. This kid is an impressive athlete. When you see him on the field, he's certainly physically got the tools, and then you watch his running and how quick he is for a young man his size. And I will say this, I only know this secondhand, but I hear from other people, not just people in the Riverside Inner Circle, he's an extremely hard worker. And we're going to say that a lot during the course of the year as well. But he is impressive.
Absolutely. So that's our overview of the Lackawanna Football Conference. You touched on it, but let's start with LFC Division I. Really a loaded division, a lot of talent. I mean, you expect that being Division I, but and like you said, right to start week 1, Scranton Prep, Valley View are facing off. Joby, what do you see in this division?
Well, first and foremost, Joe, the schedule makers, I kind of get what their goal was here, because for the past couple of years, Scranton Prep and Valley View have played in week 10. Okay. And Joe, I'm kind of old school. I don't care when you play, when you're two very good football teams. And there was a time way back when your rivalry game was always in week 10. I think you're familiar with that format, being a longtime Michigan fan. Right. Michigan, Ohio State's always the last game of the regular season. But in that process in college, there's a big gap between the last game of the regular season and when you were to play again. For example, the Big Ten championship game maybe, or as far back as when I was a big college football fan following teams, you had the bowl game. So there was always a rest period. In high school, if you play this big arch rival in week 10, and it's oftentimes between two very good football teams, which Valley View and Scranton Prep certainly are on a year in and year in basis, they just physically abuse each other in week 10 and then have to try to come back and play again in the postseason because both of them are in different classifications.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Valley View being in 4A and Scranton Prep being in 3A. So the idea was, let's move this Prep Valley View game earlier in the season. And I guess just the way the matrix works out, and you and Mike Ognoski would know much more about how a schedule matrix works. I'm not that into it, but And this is how the equation landed. And we have Scranton Prep and Valley View here in week 1. And then obviously both teams have plenty of time to kind of get themselves, if they do take this game takes a physical toll on them, they're able to come back and recover and save their seasons or continue on with their seasons, whatever. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a battle. It's a heck of a week 1 game. We've had these types of games before where two very highly ranked opponents faced off in week 1, so I'm looking forward to that. These two teams do not like each other. I hate using that phrase in high school football, but they do not.
Right.
In the world of social media, that's just what happens when two teams are so competitive and in the quest for the same championships. Scranton Prep certainly has an edge in experience. Valley View has some big people coming back, and they have some very talented players. All-state linebacker Johnny Marino is back, and they have some experience back on the defensive side of the ball. It's going to be a great game for week 1, certainly, and will go a long way in determining the Division I champion. That being said, Joe, we can't forget about Delaware Valley's in this division.
Right.
A much improved North Pocono is in this division. You look at Scranton High, a lot of people are talking about the great athletes that team has this year. Wallenpaupack's got a new coach. It's going to be a pretty deep division, and it's going to be difficult to navigate it through. If you're able to come through this division undefeated at the end, I think you have a lot to be optimistic for in the postseason.
Absolutely. And just to add a little bit more, Scranton Prep is 3rd in the Class 3A state rankings, according to Penn Live. Valley View is 6th in Class 4A in those preseason football rankings. And this is, I mentioned Scranton Prep's great run last year to states. Valley View, I feel like, shouldn't be overlooked last year, that they took Dallas to the brink in the district title game. And Dallas is a team that almost won a state championship last year. So, I mean, these are two obviously great teams. And like you said, you go to Abington Heights, which...
how can we forget about it? I overlooked Abington Heights. Joe, listen, you want to talk about a program that you're going to have to keep an eye on this year. It's Abington Heights. I'm going to tell you why. Don't forget, in 2020, Abington Heights did not play football at any level.
Right.
Okay? Junior high, freshman, varsity, no football. What that does to a program is immeasurable. Okay? The administration had decided no contact sports in the fall as they were still trying to combat, or the country was still trying to deal with the aftermath of what was still COVID-19. We were still trying to figure it out. And their administration had decided that the best course of action for them to keep their students safe was to have no contact sports. But that just set the program back. And it's taken a little while, but Coach Joe Repshis and his staff over there have done a great job of getting kids back into the program, reinvigorating that fan base, and kind of on all levels increasing the participation of the student athletes there at Abington Heights. And I'm telling you, with Nick Bradley at quarterback, that he's already got an NCAA Division I scholarship locked up to Auburn. And you've got some pretty good receivers, tall, lanky kids. Sean Theodore, a former quarterback, is out at receiver. They've got a lot of experience up front. If you saw the tour around the camps, when I went to Abington Heights, AJ Abda is back. He was a potential all-star at tackle last year. They've got Brandon Lazinski up front, who's a 4-year starter. So they've got some experience, size, strength. And I'm telling you, you mentioned Valley View. Again, yes, Valley View lost to Dallas in district final 21-18. So if you have convert your extra points, you could possibly win that game or at least tie. Abington Heights also gave Dallas all it could handle in week 1 of last year. We go back to that. What a great week 1 matchup. That was a heck of a game last year, if you remember, and Dallas was able to win it. So I think Abington Heights is one of those teams you have to keep an eye on all year.
Yeah, absolutely, Joby. And you mentioned, you said, like, obviously you got Nick Bradley coming back as quarterback. You like to have an established quarterback coming back. You're off on the right foot. How important, I want you to touch on, how important is it to have, like, the returning line as well to these teams.
Joe, listen, when I'm going through the preseason, when I look, of course, most fans are going to focus in, you do your quarterbacks coming back. And Nick Bradley, there was no better quarterback last year in the league. He was our all-region quarterback, threw for more than 2,000 yards. So, as I mentioned earlier, if you have a quarterback back with that kind of experience, that's a step up to having a successful season. Now, how successful always depends on how well your offensive line does in terms of executing, coming together, and being physical and staying healthy. A.J. Abda got hurt the first play of the first series of the game last year in week 1. He was lost for the season. You have to have a little bit of depth up front, and you have to have kids who have put the time in the weight room, and everybody does these days, Joe. Every time I go to every camp, you kind of get the same answer from all the kids. We've worked hard in the weight room. We've done our conditioning. But you really have to have offensive line. What people don't understand is the actual mental part of the game that's so challenging for these young players is, listen, anybody could draw up a play that looks successful on a chalkboard. If you block it here, block it there, block this linebacker. When you break the huddle and you come out to the line of scrimmage, when those linemen identify the alignment of the defense, that whole blocking scheme may change on the fly. So I don't know if enough fans give the credit to the offensive linemen for, 1, knowing their assignments, 2, executing their assignments, and 3, then having to do it in a physical nature, being able to, this is a contact sport. So that's, anytime you have several offensive linemen coming back, that's also a huge advantage to you coming into a season. And we go back to Scranton Prep has 3 starting linemen back. Valley View's got 2. Abington Heights has 5, if you count A.J. Abda. So those are places where those teams are going to be very, very strong coming into the season. Experience, strength, and talent.
Absolutely. And frankly, sometimes when I'm covering games, I don't give the linemen enough credit either, but they deserve all the credit in the world for opening holes and protecting the quarterback. That is for sure. And you touched on Delaware Valley. It's weird to see them. You've got them ranked 7th in your preseason poll. You've got them as, a sleeper team. It's so weird to see a team like, as usually a powerhouse that Delaware Valley is, kind of trying to reload here, but they obviously lost a lot of talent. I mean, Aiden Black, Ryder Machado, Justin Kolitsnik. I mean, but they do have, Logan Olsemer coming back. Talk a little bit about DV.
Okay, Joe. Well, listen, here's the thing. And I think the way I stated it in the game face was, anyone who overlooks Delaware Valley does so at its own risk.
Right.
Okay?
Yes.
Well, and here's the reason why. Look, it's a big school. Coach Keith Olsemer and his staff do a great job. They have a deep roster. But this is really the first time in a couple of years here now, probably in the last 6 or 7 years, where Delaware Valley took some hits with graduation because it's high school sports. You're going to graduate starting players. But the 3 players that Delaware Valley graduated from last year's district championship team were 4-year starters. Okay, so in addition to how talented those kids were, they were there for a very long time. And when you say 4-year starters, I'm not just talking about 40 games. They played close to 50 football games. Okay?
Right.
So that's almost the equivalent of 5 years worth of experience out of those kids. And Aiden Black, we know, is a Division I player. He's at Stanford, so you're going to have to figure out a way to replace somebody like him, which is not easy. They also had an outstanding offensive lineman in Jacob Albach. He's a Division I player, okay, at Albany. So these are talented kids they have to replace. They do have talented players that they are bringing in and returning. You mentioned Logan Olsemer, again, starting quarterback with big game experience. He will be the first to tell you when he played against the likes of Harrisburg and Downingtown East last year, it was probably more than he could handle. But you saw how much better he was at the end of the year as compared to what he was the beginning of the year. And he was a heck of a quarterback. He was probably, right there in the discussion for being one of the best quarterbacks in the conference at the end of the season. And don't forget, too, his best game came in the state playoffs against Whitehall. So he has that type of experience. He's got that kind of confidence. So that's going to help Delaware Valley. And again, Joe, the biggest thing with Delaware Valley is you can't get too hung up on what Delaware Valley's record is going to be after playing in Florida in week one.
Right.
Okay. Eventually down the road, they play Central York. These non-league games that Delaware Valley schedules are often, against very, very, very talented football teams from certainly outside of our area. And, last year, Delaware Valley started 0-3.
Right.
Finished up with 10 wins.
Yep.
So you don't know. I think Delaware Valley is going to be much better at the end of the year once some of these younger players kind of come around. But yeah, you can't have a football season without mentioning Delaware Valley as a team that's going to be in the thick of it.
No doubt. All right. Any other thoughts on Division I before we move to Division II?
I think we covered it pretty good, Joe. I think one of the key things is for all of the teams in Division I is to, those are the big schools. So they do have some depth. They can withstand and endure some injury situations. As we get into diving into these smaller schools, you're going to see they don't have as big a window or certainly a little as much wiggle room with their starting lineups, but we can get that. I think it's going to be a very exciting year in Division I. And I think, some of these games are going to be a lot tighter than people anticipate.
Absolutely. I'm with you. All right. So let's move on to Division II. I guess, what is kind of your overlook here on LFC Division II?
Okay. Well, you have to start with Dunmore only because Dunmore is the measuring stick for all the other programs in that division. Now, in a similar situation as Delaware Valley was, in terms of they had a lot of graduated players. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and that team went to the semifinals last year in Class 2A. Don't forget, Joe.
Right.
They recovered. Dunmore started the year 3-2 last year and ended up in the Eastern Final.
Yep.
So they have some experience and they play a lot of kids. Anytime you're winning games by a large, I don't want to count Dunmore totally out just yet, but the teams you have to watch in this division this year, Western Wayne has almost its entire starting offense back from last year, including the division's leading rusher in Josh Minton. Okay.
Right.
And they've got 3 or 4 linemen back as well. So again, it goes back to what you and I were talking about earlier, Joe, where, if you have a quarterback and you have some linemen back, that's a good thing. That's a positive. So I like Western Wayne to be a real challenger in that division. And I also think you have to watch Honesdale has a veteran team coming back, and Mid-Valley could be the real sleeper in that division.
Yeah, absolutely. To touch on Dunmore, I mean, like you said, they lost a ton, but this is obviously, a power program in the area. They, like you said, they didn't have the greatest start to last year. I covered the Dunmore Mount Carmel game, and it was good for them to schedule a team like Mount Carmel early in the season, get them experience. But they turned it on, obviously, and they make a run to the semifinals, and they just had a very impressive year. No, a small note on Coach Kevin McHale. After that Mount Carmel game, I was obviously wearing a Packers hoodie, as I tend to do, as you know. And so we talked about Jordan Love, and he asked me how I think he was going to be. And I'm just like, I think he's going to be all right. And Kevin also said, I think he's going to be all right too. So whenever he has an opinion on the Packers, I want to hear it because it's positive and it's right. And I like it.
Joe, I do also like you interjecting there, getting our listeners used to some of the cheerleading you'll be doing as we go out and move forward with this podcast. We already mentioned you're in Michigan.
That's right. And, yep, Michigan fan, Packers fan, St. Louis Cardinals fan. It's Duke Blue Devils in basketball. Yeah, so you know it. I'll be doing some cheerleading, without a doubt.
Yes, and for anyone who may not know out there, for our listeners, Joe is an extremely passionate Green Bay Packers fan, and we mentioned it early on. It's nice of him to interject here, so kind of give you a little bit of an idea of how much he enjoys rooting for his favorite teams. He's also a Michigan fan. So throughout the course of our broadcast here, you're going to hear a lot of cheerleading from Joe during Michigan time and certainly the Green Bay.
That's right, Joby. That's right, Joby. I am in fact an owner of the Green Bay Packers. Let's not forget that. So been to a bunch of games at Lambeau Field. It's one of the greatest places on earth. But yeah, that'll be my football.
Joe, it's always nice of you to nice for you to and it's always nice of you too, Joe, to unveil you have deep pockets as an owner of the Green Bay Packers.
That's right. That's right. That's right. We get invited to the shareholders meeting every year, and that's it's very, very, very exciting.
They value your input. That's for sure.
That's right. That's right. So, but yeah. So obviously, like you said as well, with Western Wayne, they have a lot of returning. I was actually surprised to see that Sean Owens was back as well, right, for Western Wayne? Joby? All right, Joby. And like you mentioned, Western Wayne, a lot of returners, Josh Vinton, and I was actually surprised to see that Sean Owens is back. I had thought he had graduated for some reason, but Sean Owens is back.
Yeah, Joe, one of the things that I have always liked to do in my sports writing career is dive into kind of these in-depth stories about the players outside of their playing achievements. And, whether it be some personal challenges that they go through, God forbid, some sort of a family tragedy or a loss of a loved one that they've overcome or dedicated the season to. And, a couple of years ago when Sean Owens kind of burst upon the scene, Western Wayne had a real good team and he was one of the key players. So he could turn a game around in an instant. He was that good, that talented. And, that's why you probably think he's been around forever, because He's been around a starter for 3 years now. But last year during the summer, I had found out that he had this neck issue where he had to have a couple of vertebrae fused together. And he played last year, which many people thought he wasn't going to be able to do, including his doctors.
Right.
And he did so with some rods and some screws in his neck. And it did limit him a little bit. But I talked to him when I did my visit around the camps, and boy, Joe, he is excited about being 100% now. He had the surgery to remove the rods as stabilizers in his neck and the screws. And he's just out there having a lot of fun. He's playing at 100% and he's flying around the field. Boy, it was fun to see. And again, yes, you mentioned Western Wayne. He's the type of kid. He's a difference maker, especially in that Division II classification there. And I think Western Wayne, a team that reached the District 2 Class 3A final, is going to be a leading candidate to get back there again this year.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be really exciting to see him play this year. And let's talk about a rival Honesdale. Like you said, look out for them. They have experience coming back. You got Aiden Collins at quarterback. You've got Mason Avery again in wrestling corner. He's one of the area's top wrestlers. He, made it to states, and this kid doesn't back down from anything. He actually likes the challenge. He wants the challenge. So this is it'll be interesting to see what Honesdale's able to do with their experience coming back.
Joe, this is a team in Honesdale that Coach Paul Russick has been kind of waiting for. Team, and it's funny, you mentioned Mason Avery as a wrestler. He's got about 4 or 5 wrestlers on this team,
right?
That are pretty good. So I expect Honesdale to be a team that's going to be right there. The one thing that you have to kind of hope for at Honesdale, this is a team that has shown some real promise a couple of years ago, off to a great start, and then kind of ran into the buzzsaw. They played up at Lakeland and got beat pretty handily, and then you lose a couple players to injuries in that game, and that has a negative effect on the rest of your season. Had a very challenging early schedule last year, but then reeled off 3 big wins, but it wasn't enough to get them over the hump and get to the playoffs. But I really think this is Coach Russick's most experienced team. It's by far his most talented team. And it goes back to, Joe, I hate to harp on it because we just touched on it at the start of the show. And if you have those elements, it's usually a recipe for success during the season. You have the quarterback with experience. You have 4 offensive linemen coming back, 3 linebackers coming back. When you have that type of experience in those 3 places, it's a recipe for success during the season.
Absolutely. Also, you mentioned Mid-Valley as a team to kind of look out for. This is a team that lost, well, unfortunately last year, Jordan Shumaleski to injury. And then obviously this year he graduated, and Victor Holtz as well graduated. But this is a team that returns Jacob Lesher, and unfortunately because of the injury, I believe Brett Boyanoski got some experience at quarterback and he returns. What is it about Mid-Valley that makes you think, they could have a nice season?
Mid-Valley, again, you start with having Jacob Lesher back. Okay. You have a kid who can really run. He had 1,400 yards rushing last season. He's a playmaker. He's got experience. He's got an outstanding offensive line returning. I believe 4 starters are back for the Spartans up front. They've got some size. The biggest thing for Mid-Valley this year that I see is when I went to practice and visited Mid-Valley, a lot of players. The Spartans have some depth. And yes, Brett Boyanoski got some valuable playing experience when he filled in for Jordan Shumaleski last year. That will certainly be a benefit for them this year. A challenge for Mid-Valley is this, Joe. This year, Mid-Valley is up in Class 3A. So when the schedule came up around, their non-league schedule had to kind of increase a little bit. And listen, Mid-Valley opens with Pittston Harriet, and I believe they play Berwick. Those are tough games during the course of a year. And just to kind of close out the division as a whole, Joe, I think, we already mentioned, obviously, Dunmore, Western Wayne, Holmesdale, Mid-Valley, very good. West Scranton is going to be improved. Obviously, 3rd year in with Coach Jake Minetti. Now these players have been introduced to his format and his style of coaching and had a couple of off seasons under him. And Lakeland is still in rebuild mode. I know it's hard to believe for people, but knowing how talented and how good Lakeland was a couple of years ago, where it kind of blew away everybody that it played and went on to win the District 2 Class 2A championship. But they had a huge senior class on that team. And so they're still trying to rebuild a little bit, had some injuries last year, fell to 1-9. I still think this is a rebuild mode for Lakeland, but it's going to be a much better season than what they had last year because of the fact they've got an influx of players from a 7th and 8th grade team that was undefeated, and they've also got some experience back. Even though last year it was a tough season, those players saw a lot of playing time.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so let's move on to LFC Division 3.
Last but not least, Joe.
Yes, exactly. As you're saying, there's plenty of talent here. You got a Lackawanna Trail team coming off one of its greatest seasons ever. You've got Riverside coming off a strong season, and they have plenty of talent returning. You can never count out a team like Old Forge either. So what do you think of Division 3?
Okay, Joe, I walked away from my visits from those teams a lot more optimistic about the level of competition in the division than I did last year. And I'll say that meaning that last year, after I had visited all the practices around the camps, I walked away saying Lackawanna Trail was head and shoulders above everybody in that division. And that played out, okay? But the closest game Lackawanna Trail had last year before it lost was against Riverside. And I think both of those teams this year, Lackawanna Trail returns Demetrius Douglas. Again, these are guys you're familiar with on the wrestling mat.
You know it.
They have some linemen back. Lucas Evans is outstanding. Colin Owens is a returning starter up front. Max Kimmel is a 2-time all-region selection, and he is an incredible all-around athlete. He plays receiver. He's a punter. He's a defensive back. He can play quarterback if he needed to. He can play running back if he needed to. So Coach Steve Jervis is very optimistic about this team, but I think this year more than last year, He's looking at the bigger picture, and that means he wants to be healthy for the state playoffs.
Right.
Because I think he has that kind of talent level where he can contend for a state title again. That being said, I think Riverside, we talked, Tavion Branch is the best player in the Lackawanna Football Conference in terms of as a college recruit. They've also got quarterback Chase Tedonio back. He's a 2,000-yard passer from last year. He's challenging to get into that 4,000-yard passing mark for his career, which Riverside has a half dozen guys that have done that. So he's going to have a real good season. They've got outstanding players on both sides of the football with a lot of experience. So I just think those two teams are a little bit ahead of everybody else. But the rest of the division, I think, is going to be extremely competitive and will be competitive against those two teams when they all play head-to-head.
Yeah, and just to touch a little bit more on Trail, 5th in Class 1A in the state in the preseason Penn Live poll. Riverside is 8th in Class 2A in the state, according to Penn Live. Like you mentioned, Riverside had a really good game against Lackawanna Trail last year, losing 28-21. Riverside also had a close game against Dunmore to cap the season in the District 2 Class 2A title game. It was 13-7, and interesting enough, I actually covered that game, and that game was close, Joby. I mean, that was kind of a back and forth defensive struggle in the second half. This Riverside team is really, as you already kind of mentioned, intact. I don't want to, I must obviously mention Reese Gahan. He's no longer there, so that is obviously.
Yeah. I mean, Riverside did lose a big piece.
Yeah.
I don't
want to say.
So, yeah, you're right. You're right on here. Look, this is a very talented team, and anybody who knows Coach Harry Armstrong's history, he likes to put the ball in the air. He likes to play a wide open style. And this is a talented team. They're going to be exciting to watch, and it's going to be a great test for them and see how entertaining they can be through the course of the 10 games in the regular season, how they prepare. Listen, they're going to open with Dunmore in a rematch of last year's District 2A championship game. That's going to be a huge gauge for Riverside and its fan base because, as we mentioned earlier on, Scranton Prep and Valley View, great week 1 game. How about Riverside and Dunmore? I think that's a great gauge for both programs to see where they're headed in here in this season.
Absolutely. And, I know from, playing them in basketball when I was a teenager, I just feel like you can never count Old Forge out of anything. And, they've got a few returning, what do you think of Old Forge?
Joe, I think you better be careful if you overlook Old Forge this year. I think that, again, starting quarterback TJ DiMatteo is back. You've got some linemen up there that can play football. Defensively, they're going to be much better this year. They've got some good athletes back. Chris Rasmus is back. And here's the thing. I think at times Old Forge played really well last year and looked the part of an Old Forge Blue Devil team. Against the better teams, the more experienced teams, naturally they didn't look as good. So people kind of get a little bit, put them in the back burner. But I'm telling you, Old Forge is going to be in every football game this year and extremely competitive. They've got the sprinter, Kale Krasnowski. He's the District 2 champion in 110 hurdles, so they got a guy who can go to distance anytime he carries the ball. A lot of weapons on this football team at Old Forge, and I think this team has got a little bit of that Old Forge meanness in it, that nastiness that they play with, and they play. And look, anytime you're an underdog and you're an Old Forge underdog, I think you got to be very, very careful if you're Lackawanna Trail in Riverside to not underestimate just what they're going to bring to the table.
You're absolutely right. All right, Joby. Anything else to kind of put a wrap on?
Yeah, I just want to wrap up Division 3 really quickly here, Joe. I know we're kind of pressed for practice this year. I'm very impressed with the organizational skills in the practice. The talent level is very high there. Holy Cross, not a lot of players, small roster, but Holy Cross has a lot of kids coming back from last year and won a couple of games last year. So don't be surprised if Holy Cross gives teams a lot better challenge this year than what you may anticipate coming into a season. And let's not forget Montrose is trying to hang on. Montrose has a lot of kids out for the team, believe it or not, 25 plus. For them, that's a big number, Joe.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see. Now, again, Montrose is not part of the league, but those other teams are going to be part of that division. I think it's going to be a very competitive division.
Absolutely. And I say it all the time, Joby, Holy Cross, we look to futures bright.
So, yes, of course.
as a member of the Holy Cross Bishop Hannon campus of 2007, 2008, we look to futures bright. So we'll see what happens this year in Division 3. Joby, let's take a couple minutes here. We've talked about football. We had some other sports, other fall sports that will be starting this week, and golf is already underway. Let me start by shouting out Scranton Prep's Ben Boyanoski, who is the Times-Tribune Athlete of the Week. That'll be in Tuesday's paper. He shot an even par 72 at Elkview Country Club to capture the individual title and help the Cavaliers win the team crown at the Bob Simons Classic. He also helped Scranton Prep to a 3-0 start in Lackawanna League play. One of those matches was Prep beats rival Abington Heights 149-151. So congrats to Ben. That's a great start to the season for him and for Scranton Prep. Joby, let's talk about, you went to a couple media days, volleyball, tennis. What do you got to say about those sports?
Well, Joe, I hope you can still hear me clearly.
I can.
Superb. I hope I didn't interrupt you there when you were trying to talk about Ben Boyanoski. Yeah, so I had volleyball media day on Saturday for the Lackawanna League and District 2 tennis media day yesterday at Wyoming Seminary. It was a lot of fun for me to get a chance to actually sit down and talk with all of the players who attended both of those sessions. And look, everybody's all excited. It's a new season. Again, Scranton Prep's girls tennis team is defending Class 2A state champions. A lot of excitement. In fact, Scranton Prep returns all 3 singles players who went 4-0 in the state team tournament last year, Joe. So listen, they're going to be favored to repeat and defend that championship, but you still have to start the season. And Wyoming Seminary, Ilana Rosenthal is the defending 2-time state champion in Class 2A in singles. So a lot of excitement should be surrounding girls tennis and volleyball. It's pretty exciting. Blue Ridge had a great season last year, won a District 2 championship. We know the great career that Libby Zick had. She has since graduated, so there'll be a little bit of a rebuild there at Blue Ridge. That opens the door for some really good competition. North Pocono ended last year by winning the District 2 Class 3A championship, and North Pocono returns all of its starters, including Mia Suma and Sawyer DeLucy, who were all region players. So I'm looking forward to all the fall sport seasons. Joe, can't wait to get started.
I was going to say it should be great, Joby. Good luck to everyone. We are underway, my friend. We're going to have a big week, obviously, in football, and we're here. So, that will also wrap up episode 1 of Film Room. Let's hope we have another episode, but we at least got one in the bank, Joby.
Joe, we have one in the bank, and all technical issues aside, I think everything went well. I hope the listeners enjoy it. And as long as they listen and tune in, we'll be here, I think, for them.
You know it, my friend. All right. Thank you, Joby.
You did a great job, by the way, Joe.
Thank you, Joby. You did as well. We'll talk to you next week.
Very good, Joe. Thanks for including me, and look forward to the great season ahead.
Absolutely, my friend.